Thank you, Paranjoy and Arifa, and thanks Malini for the generous introduction a little bit ago. What I'm going to try and do is kind of build on top of what Paranjoy and Arifa put out, but also try and think through in broader terms. I mean, I'm going to try, because from what both Paranjoy and Arifa said, as was the case with Malini's introduction also, I mean, I think we're all here today because we all are struggling with what the consequences of the 2019 election results are, and what are the kind of steps to take forward, how we're tentative, how we're, with concern, what are the kind of steps to take, where do we put our foot next? Is the ground firm? That kind of sense. And so I'm going to try take several steps back and try and create a big picture to see whether there are steps to take. I want to kind of end this panel on a note wherein we try and open up the possibilities of that kind of discussion. Today is actually the 50th day. Exactly 50 days ago was when the election results came out, May 23rd. Today is exactly 50 days. And I'm glad we waited 50 days to have this event in Lamakaan, because the first 20 days, 15 days or so, the commentary that came out was fairly uninspiring. And I use the word uninspiring in the sense that the commentary that came out was fairly shallow. Some commentators saying that every Indian now thinks of Modi every minute, or it's almost like they accepted, they without necessarily, just on the grounds of 303 seats, just on the grounds that the NDA was close to 2/3 majority, just on those grounds they accepted. And I'm not saying that should not be framed as a hypothesis, but they quickly accepted that India has changed fundamentally, it's done, it's over, etc. And there was a lot of hand-wringing commentary that came out immediately after. 50 days later, I think there is a whole bunch of more things to grapple with in terms of data, right? So, for instance, if you look at the Lokniti CSDS study, or the post-poll surveys, and look at the data, we get a lot out of it. We really have a basis for trying to understand what Paranjoy and Arifa described. We can get really concrete in terms of some of their descriptions, in terms of how the numbers itself played out. So that's where I want to start. I want to spend about 5 or 6 minutes looking at some of that data, and from there go on to then talk about what that data means and how we can take 2 steps back and think about this problem. So, while there's a lot of data, and it's impossible for me to summarize all that data. I mean, I think the CSDS Lokniti post-poll survey came out as about 40 articles in the Hindu over a period of a couple of days, a few days. So it's almost impossible to summarize all of that, but I want to pick on a couple. This election, as the 2 previous panelists have said, saw a lot of consolidation, communal consolidation, caste consolidations of various kinds, etc. And so I want to talk first about consolidations through numbers a little bit, and then go on to ask the questions that follow. So I'm going to take on 2 consolidations. One is the consolidation of youth behind the BJP, and second, the consolidation of religious, that is majority Hindu communities and caste communities behind the BJP. So in terms of youth, it's, 2014, one of the strongest analytical points that had come out post the 2014 election was that part of that victory of the Modi government was a result of unanticipated youth consolidation behind Modi and the BJP. And 2019 saw the same happen. As a matter of fact, in some ways, that consolidation increased. So between the first-time voters, the 18 to 22-year-old voters, the first-time voters, and we must be very clear. When we do analysis, we need to give credit where it's due. So the BJP did do an enormous amount of work to try and consolidate that vote bank. Back in 2017, in his Independence Day speech, Modi made a reference to the coming year, 2018, as a year where 2018 as a year where those born at the turn of the century in the year 2000 would become people of voting age, and he welcomed them into the family, right? So there's a lot of attention being paid to that all the way back from 2017 onwards. And what we saw was that, for instance, in the 18 to 22-year-old category, we saw a dramatic consolidation of votes for the BJP. Dramatic in the terms of the fact that, from 2014 to 2019, there was a 4% increase in that age group in terms of the number of people who voted for the BJP. In the second-time voters, that is the 23 to 27-year-olds, again, we saw an 8% increase in the total number of people who voted for the BJP in this thing. And there's an interesting side note there that the Congress also saw an increase in the number of votes it received from that second group, right? But overall, you can say that 35 and below, we saw an enormous amount of consolidation around Modi/BJP. And I'm constantly saying Modi/BJP because I want to go back to what Arifa raised in terms of, what is this vote about? And I'll come back to that later. So there is this very, very significant consolidation of the youth vote that happens behind the BJP and Modi. And so, there are lots of details that I can go into, and I hope we can get to some of the details when we go into the Q&A mode. And this consolidation of youth is not happening in some very specific groups. It's happening across caste groups. So among the OBCs, especially the lower OBCs, and that's a point that Paranjoy made earlier, among the lower OBCs, among specific Dalit groups, etc., it's happening across. Right? So youth consolidation, these numbers that I just quoted, is not a kind of a very sectoral phenomena, but it's across multiple caste groups, etc. Of course, youth within the minority communities, minority religious communities, etc., went the exact opposite way. Second, let's look at religion and caste together. And again, just what I just said, there's dramatic amounts of data available to point to what Arifa and Paranjoy said, which is never before have we seen this kind of polarization. The number of votes, the votes that went to BJP/Modi from the Hindu community, the kind of consolidation we saw there was unprecedented. In terms of, for instance, 2014, 36% of Hindus voted for the BJP. In 2019, that went to 44%. That's an 8% increase on an already consolidated bloc. We saw further consolidation, right? So, the polarization is there, it's set in, and that's what we need to take seriously, right? Similarly, among caste groups. We've heard quite a bit from Arifa on what happened in UP, the UP story. And the UP story, everybody thought the political arithmetic of the Gathbandhan, the Mahagathbandhan would work, and the Mahagathbandhan failed to a significant degree. And the Mahagathbandhan failed to a significant degree. If you look at, for instance, the bypoll results before the general elections, everybody thought that the Mahagathbandhan had it all tied up, especially when they entered Western UP for the Kairana bypoll, and the Gathbandhan won. It seemed like they had figured out the arithmetic. right? Because the Bharatiya, the BLD, the Lokdal joined the coalition at that point, and it seemed like between Samajwadi, Bahujan Samaj Party and the Lokdal, they would have got it all tied up. But you look at the numbers, and the numbers are fascinating in terms of what it reveals. According to the Lokniti survey, 91% of the Jats in UP voted for the BJP. Now that is BLD's vote bank. That is BLD's vote bank, right? RLD, I'm saying BLD. RLD's vote bank, right? So, I mean, it not only didn't see the vote transfer happen to the Gathbandhan in general, but we saw RLD candidates itself not get elected, right, being abandoned, right? So also, for instance, the Dalit vote share across India during this period, during the 2019 election, 2014 to 2019, it went from 24% to 34%. Adivasi vote share went up for the BJP by about 8%. Right? So we are seeing marginalized communities also shift and become part of this polarization, because it is a Hindu identity that's working there. Right? And I think it's really important to kind of acknowledge all this in as clear terms as possible before we kind of try and step forward from here. And if you really take the UP case, and Paranjoy did mention this earlier, and I'll just put it out in numbers. For instance, the Yadav versus quote unquote the lower OBCs. The lower OBCs, 18% increase in the lower OBC vote share for the BJP in UP. Okay. Dalit vote share, non-Jatav Dalits, pretty significant increase in their vote share for the BJP in UP, right? So that is what happened. There was significant consolidation of caste and religious communities under circumstances of a polarizing narrative, and this also happened significantly through a youth mobilization, right? And so I think these are two consolidations. I mean, the other thing is gender. Women had always been a little behind in terms of voting for the BJP. But this time we saw a dramatic rise in terms of the number of women who voted for the BJP. I think the women vote went up for the BJP by about 6% in one election. So, we are seeing these consolidations. Now, the important question is to ask, what are these consolidations about? Where are these consolidations coming from? What is the reason for this consolidation, right? And to one degree or another, both Arifa and Paranjoy have answered that question, and I just want to underscore it quickly and then move forward. So, there are three things that clearly worked. One is coming out of the airstrikes, the attack on the attack in Kashmir, the airstrikes, the whole sentiment of national security and nationalism rolled up into one big thing, right? And Modi as this person who kind of executes that. So, I mean, it's fascinating again. If you look at how, in the post-poll surveys, who people attribute this quote-unquote success of the post-Pulwama airstrikes. This is an index of polarization. Within Hindu voters of the BJP, it's attributed to the Indian Air Force and to Modi/BJP. Whereas in non-BJP voters, it's only to the Indian Air Force, right? Especially among the Muslims, etc. Right? So these are so it's one is nationalism / national security. The second is what has been repeatedly referred to. This nationalism / national security is also simultaneously rolled into a branding of Modi. Right? Brand Modi. So Modi stands out as a particular kind of brand which has a certain set of features, and that's a characteristic of of any brand, right? I mean, whether it's a soap or a shirt or a car, it's promoted as having a certain set of characteristics, and all of the various things that were said in terms of poverty, poor background, no family, all of those kinds of things. There's a particular kind, and a person who communicates straight to ordinary people, right? That kind of branding. And the fundamental thing about branding is that when there are two brands fighting it out, then something happens, right? In terms of the fact that, it's a matter of what the discourse creates in terms of two brands, right? But in this case, I think what really happened was that the BJP's electoral machinery clearly created Modi as a brand, whereas all the other political parties were fighting the election in an older mode, in a different mode. They were not fighting the election in a branded mode at all, right? So that's the second. So national security / nationalism. Second is a brand Modi. And I think these two are rolled into one. It's one complex. So while I am pulling these two apart to a degree, I think they are rolled into one when one could potentially take it as one thing. The second thing that worked, and that's very clear from the post-poll surveys, is schemes, right? So whether it is the Ujjwala Yojana or the Modi, the farmer direct payment of 2,000 rupees every quarter to farmers, whether it's any of these, the schemes worked. The schemes were all rolled out, as Arif has said, in the last, the last 8 months to 12 months, but they worked. But between this nationalism and the schemes, what didn't work and where did the opposition go wrong, right? So the question of the economy, the large, huge, 10 million crore rupee question, right? The question of a failing economy, the question of a non-performing economy with fudged data, with everything wrong about the economy, just did not move, right? Jobs, support prices for farmers distressed, and every part of the farmer distress story, whether it's support prices, whether it's pesticide costs, whether it is fertilizer costs, whether it's fuel costs, any number of the broader economic issues just didn't work. And I mentioned that within the context of what where the opposition failed is because the opposition narrative clearly got stuck on that. The opposition went to town. They thought they were running a brilliant electoral campaign because they had Modi on the ropes with asking for an account of what happened to the economy, right? But they didn't quite realize that it wasn't catching traction. That this other super narrative of nationalism and this other narrative of the dole out being given in terms of the schemes, right, were both working. The BJP conceded ground completely. It stopped talking about jobs. It stopped talking about, for support prices, etc., right? There were some new promises made to farmers, but essentially, they just conceded that space. They just let it go. They just stopped engaging that, right? So I think that's really important to note. And in the last 7 or 8 minutes that I have, what I'm going to do is to say, okay, if this is the ground, if this is the ground on which we stand, that is, we are seeing significant consolidations of the kinds that I just laid out, and the reason for the consolidation is coming through the structure of nationalism, national security, brand Modi at one end, and the kind of scheme development thing that goes on, and the economy as a whole somehow just doesn't catch traction. The question of the economy doesn't catch traction at all, even though for most ordinary people it should make an enormous amount of difference, right? So, but it doesn't catch any traction at all, right? Because in that comparison between a gas stove and a gas cylinder versus are you ever going to get a job in this economy, right? Between those two, somehow people seem to be going for the former and saying the other they're ignoring, right? So this is the ground, and the question becomes, how do we go forward from here? I want to make a simple submission, and the simple submission is that where the opposition failed is that it went into an accounting mode around the question of the economy, halfway through the campaign, did not realize that the economic logic was just not catching enough traction, that they needed to do something else. And the reason it was not catching traction, of course, was the question of nationalism and the schemes, of course, but the question of nationalism. So in other words, they the economic logic that they were putting out, the accounting logic, did not have a vision, did not have a larger picture that was being driven towards. It was just simply, ye bole lekin ye nahi hua, wo bole lekin wo nahi hua. Modi ye bolta hai lekin jhoot bolta hai, right? It wasn't कि ये बोले ये नहीं हुआ लेकिन अगर ये कर सकते तो हम वहां जाएंगे, right? So that projection of a vision was entirely missing. The opposition thought it could win an election on purely accounting for the failures, right? And I'm saying this because that any question of a vision will involve the question of nationalism. So how do we come up with a response to the question of nationalism? Is the alternate structures of nationalism that we are also used to, which is the syncretic nationalism that we talk about, the syncretic image as part of a nationalist frame that we talk about, the Ganga Jamna Tehzeeb structure that we talk about as an alternative structure of nationalism, is that viable anymore? I think it's really important to ask that question honestly, think it through and answer that. I'm not saying I have an answer for that right away, but I think it's really important. What I'll do is just take 2 steps back. I mean, this is my last effort, last part, wherein I'm going to go really all the way back to broader social theory. And I'm kind of, all through, after May 23rd, whenever I'm trying to think about it, I keep thinking and I end up in these broader and broader frames. I'm thinking of a French theorist called Etienne Balibar, who, made this very simple observation about 25 years ago in a paper that I read, that nationalism that is not anti-colonial nationalism, and that is not anti-imperialist or anti-colonial nationalism, the kind of nationalism that is there in most nations now, that nationalism is constructed on one of 3 things: religion, ethnicity, or language. These are your 3 candidates. We don't have any other candidates to construct a nationalism around, right? And Balibar makes that, his response is that of these 3, I prefer the last, that is language, because at least it leaves the door open. The other 2 are determined by birth, and you get the worst kind of nationalism that heads into fascism, right? So this is there. But then, when you think about it, the RSS existed way back from, it's almost 100 years. And it's not that they were insignificant during the nationalist period, they were significant. So in other words, Hindu nationalism did catch some traction through the nationalist period, through the anti-colonial struggle, and then faded for a while and came back. 1967, the election to go back to, if you really want to draw a parallel to this current election, is 1967. Indira Gandhi's landslide sweep. The opposition is completely decimated, right? The largest opposition party, I even forget its name, it's Rajagopalachari's party. I think it's called Swatantra Party or something like that. That emerges as the largest opposition party, and it's got 44 seats, right? So the opposition, including the Jansangh, the predecessor of the BJP, is decimated in that election. And yet 10 years later, by 1977, the entire opposition has come back together, and it includes the right wing, and the Congress is defeated, right? So, things can change pretty quickly. And so I want to go back to another moment, that is, that moment when post-independence, what was the kind of nationalism that dominated India? And one of the answers is it's an economic nationalism. Nehru has been so abused that we are scared of using Nehru at all. And so, immaterial of whether we use Nehru or not, I think the broader discourse that came out of the moment of independence was discourse of self-sufficiency, discourse of independence in terms of an economy, not being subject to some of the outside forces, the temples of modern India, so to speak, in terms of, the massive development kind of pictures. Now that had a vision, and that vision was able to hold this kind of cultural religious nationalism at bay for about 30 years, till that collapsed under conditions of neoliberalism. right? With the neoliberal turn in the world, that's when that image collapses, and that's the gap into which the cultural and religious nationalism comes in. So I think we really need to think through this question of how do we respond to the nationalism, especially given the youth and the kind of aspirational spaces they occupy, especially given that it is the more marginalized within the Dalits and the OBC sectors that are actually going over to the BJP. We really need to think through this question of nationalism and ask the question, is there a different nationalism that doesn't depend on religion that can be constructed? I think it's really important that we take that question on rather than hide from it. I mean, I was involved in a very, let's say, intensive social media, very decentralized social media campaign through the 2 months prior to the election. Right? We had built an infrastructure for completely decentralized social media production and distribution, but it was run through a collective, and I remember in the collective this complete division, right? I was in the minority when I said we have to take on this nationalism. And everybody else was like, no, just avoid it. That's falling into the BJP trap. Don't go near the nationalism. Just deal with the economic failures. And we went for it, we did it. And I mean, we had a good social media campaign. We don't know the impact of it. Or rather, we know the impact. The BJP won 303 seats, right? But yeah, I mean, it's important to know that, on the social media issue, I'm not saying that it's our campaign, but a lot of independent social media efforts happen. The Lokniti's poll actually points to an interesting thing. The number of people who were exposed to social media, the voting percentages for the BJP actually went down in that. So maybe the opposition did do something right in that frame. So, I think that may be a lesson to learn there. And then the second thing to take is that the BJP did concede the ground of a failed economy. They completely conceded that ground. And so I think the pushback on that, the kind of things that are going to happen in the economy and the questions that are going to come up now are going to come back very quick. It's not like 2014 wherein everybody waited till after 2017 and 18 to start really pushing back and saying, what the hell's happened to the bloody economy? Right? This question is going to come back really much faster. And so if we can find a way to think these things through along with the question of nationalism, I think there are all sorts of windows open and all sorts of doorways open that can be rebuilt. Thanks.